kind of separated and a little up front. Well, it's 7:30, and let's get started. And are we live? Okay. Good morning. Yes, let's look and see if, yeah. And Jacob is joining online, and Sandy is unable to be here. So I don't know if Jacob's, do we have our team set up? He's not on yet. Okay. He will be on in just a minute. We'll be able to join us for about 30 minutes. So let's get started. And good morning. Thank you guys for being here. And let's go ahead and start with roll call.
Rodriguez? Bruner? Here. Mucci?
Here.
Levi? Absent. Haverfield?
Here.
And Bauer? So absent.
You can put him in when he comes. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm just thinking we normally open in prayer, and I thought we definitely need prayers. We try to peruse through our budget this year, making wise decisions. So I'll go ahead and open in prayer real quickly. So Lord, we just come before you right now as we begin this council meeting, and I thank you for those with the insight financially that give guidance to our city, and both at the county level and the city level. And we just ask, God, that you would show us how to manage our budget, that we would make wise decisions, and that we would be able to understand what truth and reality is in our budget. So we just invite your presence into this conversation this morning in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Oh, yes. Thank you. Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's get started. So we have two business items today. The first item, and we do not have any action items on this morning. It's just discussion around the governor's signing of House Bill 389. And I appreciate the tremendous work that has been done both by Finance Director Doug Racine and Steve Onofre. Thank you for your incredible work. It's been probably sleepless for a while trying to figure out what to do with what the legislature is doing and has now done. So needless to say, I understand the difficult place the governor was in. As noted previously, I'm extremely disappointed that he signed this bill, because the bill was a bill that was fraught with things that were not the best. House Bill 389, it's been clearly said that it will not bring tax relief to our citizens like they need. And I'm going on the record to say Bruce Skog had a bill that was a $150,000 homeowners exemption bill that was well thought out, well put together. He worked closely with the county and with our local citizens to come up with that bill. The House would not introduce the bill, and that's really what our citizens needed. The focus on cities is unfortunate and unfounded, but it is where we are today. And needless to say, it has ramifications to the city of Nampa and our ability to do what we need to do. So with that, Doug Racine is going to give us, walk us through where we thought we were, where we think we are. Steve Onofre, thank you then for wrapping up and sharing with us where you perceive us to be. And then we'll pick up and go from there. Doug, thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm a poor substitute for the one true source of truth, but I'll do my best today. And I want to thank also Steve and Zach for partnering with us as we begin to understand this. This has been a very complex process this year as we have sought to develop the best budget. There have been highlights and lowlights, and I think we're at the point now we can begin to put the numbers together and understand them, but I need to walk you through the story of how we got to where we're at, the implications for today and the implications for going forward in the next year. So the issues we're going to cover today will be the general government. I want to talk about the public safety funding related directly to property taxes in the general government. The levy is broken down between multiple areas in the government. General government, which is police, fire, mayor's office, finance, HR, and so forth. You've got the library that gets a levy, the airport and the cemetery and the parks and the general gov bond get a levy. But I'm focusing right here on the general government portion of our levy. The impact of the fire district separation, some fire funding analysis, and then the language of House Bill 389, and the 2 reviews we've done with Canyon County that help us clarify where we need to go and then our paths forward. So let's jump right in. This slide right here, in the bolded line right here, shows how much of our levy is dedicated directly to general government services. So we can see and keep in mind, these are a year in arrears. They're the tax year, not the city's fiscal year. So it's a year behind the city's fiscal year. But 32 million, 0.8, 34.6, 36. That's the progression, very constant as we've grown and our cost of increases. We've had an increase in the levy. At the same time, the police and the fire budgets, which are shown right down here in this group, this is the net of revenues. And these, it's very important to understand, there are revenue streams coming into the fire particularly, and some limited revenue streams coming into the police that I take off of the expenses. But when we do our budgets, we are building a budget based off of total expenses. That's what gets approved by you and by and forms the basis for our legal authority to spend. I'm being more conservative here and saying let's take out the let's account for the revenues we're getting and not try and play numbers games. But so when I look at this, you see the bottom line here. Each year, I am bringing in, like in 2018 and 19, I brought in 32.8 in property taxes. The cost of fire and police was 36.6, $3.7 million short, meaning I had to borrow that money from some other source within the city, primarily shared sales tax revenues. And we can see there's been a little bit of a progression and improvement where we start off with the 3.6 million shortfall here, 2.6 here, 1.8 here. That's a little bit transitory and a little bit illusory, that increase, because the growth in fire and police does not happen linearly. We tend to add large chunks of cost every 3 or 4 years to police or fire. This year, if we have in the budget 8 or 10 people, staff and sworn going up, the amount of money being used by the fire department or police department will go up. Still, this averages $2.5 million over 3 years that we've had to take from other city sources to pay for this. And this is important that you understand that property taxes alone, if we dedicated 100% of our property taxes from general gov just to fire and police, it would be not enough to cover them. That's 100%. So how does the mayor's office and finance and IT and HR and all the administrative services function? Well, we rely on fees, we rely on the allocations of our cost out to other departments and on shared revenue. And I'll go into that more in a minute. Please, councilors, if there's any question, please stop me. This is a complex issue, and I don't want to leave any stone unturned, but I'll try and be as succinct as I can.
Doug, can I ask a question? At the conclusion, could you share this document so our city council members don't have to write it all down? That way they...
Certainly.
Thank you.
So this is a breakdown of our most recently completed fiscal year 2020, and it shows the general government source of funds. You may have heard us reference in the past that property taxes account for 67% of the total funding for the general government. Here's that number, 66.5 at the very top. That's where we get it from, $34.6 million, again, from the other slide. That's our property taxes. We had $10 million in shared revenues. That's primarily, it's entirely liquor sales tax and sales tax shared revenue from the state. Transfers are me taking and saying all the administrative costs of operating the city and my charges out to water, wastewater, airport, everybody else. This is me charging the city for our services. So that's revenue in because we use that to offset our expenses. Allocations for fire, similar, and allocations for police, very similar, but they're directed specifically at them for costs that they absorb, the costs that we incur on their benefit. And then miscellaneous revenues. This would be things like the clerk revenue for issuing passports and other revenues. So $52 million. When I take the total expenses for the fire budget for that year was $15 million, total expenses all in. We received $2.8 million in reimbursements. I need to clarify that line. I should have changed the title. The $2.8 million was primarily fees from the fire district, about $2.5 million of revenues they send us for us providing them fire protection. And then there's about $300,000 or $400,000 worth of fees the fire department earns in terms of inspections and other revenues they bring in. That leaves us with a net fire budget of $12.2 million. These revenues, the transfers, allocations, they're not really revenues that I can say support the fire, especially miscellaneous clerk fees. That's nothing to do with fire. So the only two really sources of revenue we have to fund the fire and police and public safety is property taxes and revenues. If I break them up by percentage, we get over here, just this portion, 77.7%, 77.5% of the funding comes from property taxes, and 22.5% of the fire the fire department comes from shared revenues. When I break that down to numbers, that means that this $9 million right here, that's how much I'm going to pull out of our tax levy, because that's how much I've assigned to the fire department from our general government levy. That's the portion that our levy will reduce by this year, that 9.5. That's what I'm taking it down. And that stems part of the misunderstanding is we determined how much of our property taxes were going to the fire department, and it was really caused confusion when the language in the H Bill 389 came out that led us down a path that said the definition might be something entirely different, which would, I'll show you later, would cause us significant problems.
Can I share something real quickly? For those listening, because we're working so closely with this, they may not understand why we're going this direction in our conversation. And so there were two impacts from House Bill, there were more than two, but because the city of Nampa chose to move to a fire district, the timing for House Bill 389 was very, very bad for us. So the city of Nampa had different issues regarding House Bill 389 than other cities in the state had. And that was because of the timing of moving to a fire district and the timing of when we're moving budgets. The reason Doug is going through the information he just went through has to do with the fact that our fire district moved. Otherwise, this would not be a discussion. And so for those listening, most people in this room probably know, but if anybody comes back and listens, that's the reason why we're having this discussion, because there's additional impact to the city of Nampa because of the fire district move. We worked diligently to ensure that the fire district was protected. However, at the last minute, when the language of the bill changed, it didn't protect the city with their move. And so that's where there has been a lot of heartache. So it had to do with the language. So just for those listening.
Mayor, thank you for that clarification. Thank you very much. So these are some of the key concepts that impact us from the bill. And we'll get into the language in a bit. This literally prohibits us from budgeting for fire. If you recall, we approved the memorandum last November that indicated that we would cover and budget for fire from 10/1 to 12/31, and they would begin their new fiscal year on 1/1. This bill literally prohibits us from budgeting for them at all, which is okay from my perspective. It's work on my perspective. We can work around that, but it does prohibit us. It is very, very vague on how to define what they call money spent for fire, and I'll get into that. It limits us to 90% of total new construction and annexation. So let me add a little color around that. If we have $1 million of new construction, we could only keep $900,000 of it. The remaining $100,000 would be put back in a bucket and eventually used and Steve can explain this better than I, but used to develop some degree of property tax reduction, because that $100,000 would be allocated back to the remaining taxpayers outside the city. I'll be honest, The amount of money they're saving from this is probably pennies on the dollar for a household. That's probably what they're talking about, but it's just what we're dealing with. Now, the other issue that will limit us this year and going forward is that it limits us to an 8% budget increase. Now, you may think that, well, in the past year, we did a 0%. 2 years ago, we did a 0%. The year before that, 2.75. Why would we ever be concerned about 8%? Well, this year in particular, with Amazon, we're going to exceed that 8%, and very little of it, if any, is coming from the 3% statutory. It's all coming from new construction. And when we can use, as the council has phrased, when we can use new construction to fund growth without raising taxes, that's what we want to do it. And this, for high growth cities, this will be a great limiting factor going forward. And I'll show you what that means to us. This includes, and there's more to it, inside this 8% is the 3% legislative limit. It includes the use of any foregone. So no longer can we go to the next year and say, well, after we pay the GO bond, well, we'd contemplated using some of the foregone to meet a significant capital need. We can't do that unless it fits within that 8% cap for that year. It also includes new construction and annexation. So those items in there all have to be less than 8%. That's our cap. So like I said, if you have high growth, it's going to hurt. Now, this is the language that caused us really to get off our seats and start figuring out exactly what this impacted. Steve was on the ball here. He sent this information to us so that we could begin to analyze what's going on. Here's the difficult portion. It says, the city shall subtract an amount equal to the money spent on fire. Now, what does that mean, money spent? It's exceptionally vague. As an attorney, you might look at that and say, wow, could they get any more vague? And I don't think they could. The initial language proposed by Senator Rice was more specific and would have clarified this problem because it specified property taxes assigned to the fire department. But that language was omitted here. So if we assumed money spent means the total expenditures, it means that I would have had to pull out $4.3 million out of our budget, and that's more than I'm taking in new construction. That would actually put our budget base lower next year than it was this year. That would mean cuts. That's where we really started to look at this and go, wow, we have a significant problem. Everything we were doing came to a grinding halt, and all focus came onto this. That was the first reading. Then Zach and Steve and I had a meeting yesterday. We went through the numbers again. Zach did. I've really gracious Zach and Steve. They found this last line in the bottom that says, the last full year, the city provided fire protection services to its residents from its budget limitations under this section. That budget limitations allows us to be a little more specific in how we define money spent. And that allows us to kind of breathe easy. That's one issue. But there were two issues that impacted us monetarily from this bill. This is one, and it's the most significant. So I think we probably addressed that. We should be able to move past it with this language. But,
Hey, Doug, I would like to ask a question.
sure.
The question is, have you confirmed that with legal, that what the latitude that we feel like we can take with the language under budget limitations? Or Steve,
Probably better for
the opportunity to confirm that with any legal with the county? That we, if you don't mind, thank you. I'm just, while we're there and we're thinking that's the latitude that we have to work within, is that other language that says within budget limitations.
I think at this point, Mayor, that we're looking for direction from the State Tax Commission to analyze what that bill means. And so from a county's perspective, we're going to wait for the State Tax Commission to advise us what that language truly means.
Okay.
the presumption is, and if we need to change it, I'll rely on Steve to give us guidance, that we can go down the path we believe is what the end result's going to be. Now, if the State Tax Commission comes back and gives a different interpretation, we're going to be back in this bucket again, trying to figure out what our budget really means. It really puts us, but this is a key byproduct of this legislation. Uncertainty, date uncertainty, numerical uncertainty. It's a key byproduct. And I'll get into that more again. We're at the end of the tail getting wagged by the dog, and we have very little control over either the definition, the dates, and the expectation of when they'll provide clarity. So we have to go down the road we assume to be the most likely outcome. And if that becomes like the outcome, great, then we're all right. If not, then we'll be back here again meeting to figure out exactly how to address it.
Okay, so I have two questions. Has the State Tax Commission given you an idea of when they'll give you a response or the clarity that we need for our budgeting?
So I think they're in the same position that we all are with the 11th hour. This bill goes through and pushes all the timelines that the county and the State Tax Commission have to abide by. So I think they're scrambling, from what I understand. Alan Dornfest at the State Tax Commission is looking through. I have had a couple conversations with them, and they're scrambling to find out what the language in this bill actually is going to represent. They are also limited to, I think it was 2 years, the tax commission could provide administrative rules, and that has since been, the legislation has cut their ability to provide administrative rules to us, so they're trying to work within that language as well. So they have a difficult task as well.
And one other thing, and I'll just for the public and for staff to know, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, there is a state statute that says that any legislation passed under May 2nd cannot be put into law because you don't have the time necessary to enact that legislation within, I think it's 90 days, right? Because of your fiscal year end. But the legislature can override that, so they overrode that, which then does put us in a very difficult place because here we are in budget, and it's supposed to be for emergency reasons. And this was not an emergency reason, but that, and I believe there were 200 bills that applied to, that they shortened that time frame, which is making it very difficult to try, because all the cities are in budget right now, but specifically for us, we have less time. I mean, we have statutory deadlines that we have to meet, yet the timeline is shortened with considerable vagueness. So I guess the one thing that I'm going to turn to legal on is that on this particular piece, I think we're going to need guidance from legal on our budget. Do we move forward with the assumption of the language as we are considering?
Madam Mayor, I think we do move forward with what we anticipate or the way we interpret it. But the tax commission is the one that ultimately kind of makes that decision, and then we decide whether we have to try to oppose that or do something different. So I think we've got to move forward based on our timing, and then we need to stay in close communication with the tax commission and see how it comes out. I believe there were certainly representations from Senator Rice that the tax commission was going to interpret it correctly so that it didn't harm the fire district. But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. And my greatest concern is that this wasn't Senator Rice's bill. It was Moyle's bill. Okay, thank you.
We will do whatever the will of the council is, but with one direction or another, we must move forward, either with budgeting towards what we believe the outcome will be or something else. It's clear that we might have to make some very last-minute course corrections, but we won't know what they are until the tax commission does their work and everybody else does their work. So I'll await the will of the council, but unless given different direction, I think we'll hopefully assume that it works out for the best. But Mayor, if you feel differently, I will.
I think I don't know that we have an option.
Yeah.
So
right.
Thank you.
So I know that this is difficult, and I apologize for going through this rapidly. There's so much to unpack here, and I know I'm going through it quickly. I apologize. Let me hit a couple more quick slides to give you to put numbers around the language. So in the current year, with Amazon, our new construction estimate is about $3.6 million at the very top of the screen. For perspective, last year it was 1.7. The 3% limit, should we choose to take that, was $1.3 million, leaving a total property tax potential of $4.9 million, rounded to 5. The 8% cap, however, is $3.493 million. That's the new statutory limit, meaning we would lose property tax capacity of $1.5 million. Now, we typically we tried to avoid taking any of the 3%. Still, it puts us in a position where we're not allowed to use that, even if we needed to use it. And let's go back to the 90% cap. So 90% of the $3.6 million is $3.2 million. So that's $365,000 of taxing authority we no longer have. That's gone. I cannot get that back under the new construction. It will go into a pool and be used however the county applies their formulae to reduce property taxes of other homeowners. And under the 8% cap, I could increase our budget by $208,000 using a portion of the 3% to get back up to the $3.5 million. I mean, we're going up and down and back up again, and I apologize for the roller coaster. There's no other way to describe it. We have to apply these rules. So the point I'd like to make here is there is a path forward. My current budget included lift of about $3.5 million, 3.2 to 3.5. There's a path forward to get state tax commission changes notwithstanding, to get back to that 3.5. So we have a path forward to do this, to meet the expenses. We've got significant requests from police this year in terms of staffing and in terms of any potential union negotiation impact. If we lose any of this, I cannot fund some of that. I will run out of money quickly with the issues we've got. But we have at least a little bit of hope at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train racing towards us. Let's see. Does it go down? Okay. So,
Doug, if I may, I
Yes.
think it's clear. So what you're saying is with the new construction in Amazon, most of the 3% looks like we could take is about 0.5%.
well, we could. Let's go to this slide first, and then I'll clarify. This slide will help us clarify. This is very, 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 very vague, and there was a video clip that I'd seen of the state legislature where two legislators were arguing about this topic. One was saying, you're not going to give the cities and municipalities enough time to do their budgets if you run this legislation through. And the response from the committee chairman was, they'll just have to, quote unquote, take a stab at it. So what that means is, typically, now, if you understand the levy rate is the byproduct of the process. It's not what we use to determine taxes, it's the byproduct. So we take the entire valuation of the city's assets, $9 billion. We divide the city's budget into that $9 billion, and we get a rate. That's the levy rate. And we get that by Steve going through meticulously and taking all the new construction rolls one at a time, going through, making sure they're right, make sure the valuations are correct, auditing them, putting them into place. Then we have a value. Then we can apply it to my budget and determine the levy rate. What the legislation is asking us to do is to try and guess what the levy rate's going to be before we have the numbers to determine what it is going to be. Do you follow that? We have to determine something before we actually have the numbers to determine it. That's the take a stab at it approach, which means it's not going to be right. There's going to be something wrong that we have to fix eventually. Maybe next year, maybe the year after, maybe every single year we have to fix it because this take a stab approach. Steve has documentation on the deadlines that he is required to meet. But if you look at these numbers, right now, this take a stab at it legislation would take our new construction from $3.6 million down to possibly 2.5. That's $1.1 million that we would lose because they're using a rate that is ill-defined, but they don't have any other guidance. So let's say that that goes through. This is more likely. I think that the language, I think that's reasonable. We can probably solve that one. This one I think is going to happen. I think we're going to probably, to some degree, that 2.5 is a rough estimate, and I say rough, it's very rough, but I think we're probably going to lose that $1 million right there. So how do we recover that? Can we recover that? And the answer is, Darrell, yes, we can. If we leverage about 2% of the 3%, we can recover back up to that 8% cap of 3.4. And it will have zero impact to the taxpayers because they're going to take that money out and they're going to pass it back to the taxpayers in one form. We'll put it back in on the other side. It balances to a net zero. It's not an increase. It just, this is the unintended consequence of their legislation, is that they're trying to drive change, but they're not doing it with enough forethought. Or I need to be really careful how I speak there. The forethought and time weren't allowed to actually adequately develop this, so the intended result is property tax savings. This won't deliver property tax savings. This will deliver a shell game where people are moving money from one side of the table to another other side.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Doug, if I'm hearing you right, it's going to put the onus on the cities to tax at a higher rate.
Yes, that's exactly right.
We look like we're trying to get more money, like they said at the legislature, because we still have the need to provide public safety, do the things we do, but now it's our fault.
See, the intent isn't wrong, but the execution is. The intent is to use the most current and up-to-date levy rate to apply to new construction. Great intent, but the execution is what's flawed. So, and that's my interpretation. Steve will correct me when I'm wrong in that. He's the expert. I'm the novice. I'm the Padawan here. We have two options going forward. This is according to a conversation Steve and I had with Zach Wagner yesterday. If they can define the take a stab approach to mean something more reasonable, and this is going to take work on their part, we might be able to avoid losing that $1 million and then having to retax it on the limit. But this is something they're going to have to figure out. If not, we can leverage a portion of our 3% limit to recover those monies, but only up to the 8% limit of $3.5 million. Two paths forward, both of them hinging on some degree with what the State Tax Commission says. But personally, myself, out of the ones that I'm concerned with, it's the $1 million from the take a stab at it approach that I think is most likely to impact us. And then we have to figure out how do we recover that, or well, is it the council's will to recover it, or do we try and budget less than that? And if we do, then a lot of the things we wanted to do with police and other departments will not happen. So that's the quandary we're in. Now, let me take one more, this is future looking, just so you have a clarity. 3% now is going to be more than 3% tomorrow because we're taking the fire department out of our base. And 8% tomorrow is going to be less than 8% today for the same reason. So right now, our property tax base coming in from 2020 to 2021 is $43.6 million. The 3% cap limit would be $1.3 million. The 8% cap is $3.493. But we're taking the fire department out. The 9.5 is coming out. So my new base is roughly 37.6. So next year, if I apply 3% to 37.6, I get only $1.1 million, so we're about $200,000 less. This is just information to let you know that 3% next year is less than 3% this year. Now, we won't have the fire department cost to absorb, but it means that 3% impact to the homeowners will be much less than 3% today. I just wanted to have you make sure you understood that dynamic going forward.
And Doug, just in case someone did the math, as I did yesterday when I looked at this, when we're saying 9 million out for fire, but that's not 9 million difference between
Right.
21 and 22. So could you explain the difference, just so everyone knows?
So when we account for new construction, or when we add in the 3%, those roll into our base. This year it's new construction, next year it's on the tax rolls and becomes part of our tax base. So the $43.6 million, we add to that whatever portion of the 3% we add and whatever new construction comes in under the 8% cap. and I'm assuming we take the full 8% cap here, we may or may not, but those numbers get, and annexations as well, they get added into our base this year, and they form the base for next year. And that's not entirely correct, but it's essentially how the data flows. So every year our base goes up, and the reason that's important is that when if we go to the police department and we add, 10 new sworn officers, and we do that based off of the strength of new construction this year, that new construction has to roll in our base next year to fund those 10 new officers next year and the year after and the year after. Does that make sense? So it's a flow. You start with the base, you add in your new components, you deduct out the fire department, and you start over with new base. And Steve can do this much better than I can. I know I've missed a whole bunch here, and he can correct me on it. But in essence, it's a flow from one year to the next.
So it's 43 million, less than 9 million, whatever, plus the new construction and annexation that came in, which equals the 37.
That's exactly right.
Basically, to keep it real simple. Is that too simplified? Is it still accurate, Steve?
I think that's accurate as long as you're considering GPSGI too, right?
Yeah, right. I'm kind of speaking around that, but the GPSGI, for those of you who recall, that was the state-funded program last year where we received $9.2 million pass-through monies from the state in order to reduce our property tax levy to our citizens. And that's really important, Steve. Thank you for bringing that up, because now recall that last year we took $9 million out of our levy. And this year, coincidentally, so it's going to go back up because that GPSGI is going to reverse. We're not getting the $9 million from the state, but now I'm going to take another $9 million back out. So from our perspective, it's coincidental, but it's convenient. Our levy rate really won't be impacted long-term because we're taking $9 million out, putting $9 million in from the GPI last year and taking $9 million out this year for the fire department. So it keeps our levy rate stable. The fire district, their levy rate will go up, but from the city's perspective, we'll be stable.
It's going to be hard for the public to understand because for the city of Nampa, because we participated last year, because we have the fire district, there are a lot of moving parts. And I think the average citizen probably will not fully understand it because it's very complex.
And I thank the council and the mayor for forbearing with a numbers presentation similar to an eye chart. That was a lot to unpack there, and I appreciate your patience. And please, if any of this is unclear, please call me in my office after. I'll be willing to go through one-on-one in details of any of this information. It is important to understand because it impacts us today and tomorrow.
Yes.
So Steve and Doug, from what I gather, it's total so far, it's all up in the air. Nothing set in stone yet. However, with the fire department in the fire district, we will not have to contend with their budget, correct?
No.
Okay. Now,
I'm sorry, Mayor. Mayor. I'm sorry.
okay, so that will relieve us somewhat for our public safety.
Yes.
Now, the bad part about it is, if it's bad, is that the city and the county will have to, or if the fire district chooses to increase their budget, it would be solely for function of the fire district. Will the city or the county residents, the city of Nampa, the county residents, have to make up the difference and use more than 3%, maybe?
Victor, that is not a yes or no answer. It's a very difficult answer. And so I'd like to table that for just a second, maybe come back to it. And I think what I'd like to do is give Steve Onofre the opportunity to present to us, and then we'll come back with questions for Steve.
All right.
Steve, thank you for all your work.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And I thank you. And I certainly, looking through this last few months, appreciate the relationships that have been built between the county and the city of Nampa. I think looking back at the budgets over the last couple of years, the city of Nampa and the county has fiscally done a wonderful job of not taking what we could have possibly taken for property taxes and chose to lower in the county situation, actually lower the amount of property tax we we levied for. And of course, the city of Nampa took a very conservative approach as well. Taking GPSI certainly helped the citizens out last year, but the ramifications of that this year are going to be impactful, certainly impactful. So we appreciate the relationship, or at least I appreciate. And if we're looking at a silver lining on this bill, that's it. That's what I've got. So with respect to all of your time too, I'll try to make this as brief as possible as we try to digest this House Bill 389. I'd like to just briefly touch on the assessor's timeline in getting these values out, because Doug, you're right. The levy rate is the association between values and budget. So if budget stays the same and values go up, levy rates go down. So that's the case that we're looking at this year as we try to be conservative on the budget, that we are seeing skyrocketing values, especially in the residential sector, that will cause that levy rate to go down. Does that mean less taxes for our citizens? No, that's not what that means. So as it relates to for the assessor's timeline, this certainly 11th hour passing the bill through legislation has certainly backed them up in their processes. Statutorily, we are required to send out the assessment notice the first part of June. Our assessor generally sends those out the Friday. I think it's Veterans Day that's coming up. Yes, so the Friday before Veterans Day, I believe that's 5/24, the assessment notices will go out. Does that mean that the county knows what the value is at this time? No, this is the assessment that go out, and then property owners have the right to appeal those values. So from 5/24 until I believe it's 6/28, the property owners can reach out to the assessor to try to adjust their values, and the assessor will adjust it if the information that's provided to the assessor certainly justifies the change in value. If at that time, if an agreement they can't come to an agreement, the property tax roll is handed over to our Board of County Commissioners on 6/28, and between 6/28 and 7/12 or July 12th this year, the county commissioners will hear appeals. So even at that point, we don't know what the values are. They're not set in stone. After they complete their process, we get 5 days to wrap up all the values and then send those values to the State Tax Commission. And I believe on July 19th, which statutorily we have until the first Monday in August in order to provide those values to the State Tax Commission. I believe that at that point, we have good values to calculate this preliminary levy rate. August 3rd.
Steve, can I add a comment here?
Sure.
We're meeting with the council on July 12th and 13th to review our finalized budgets. He's not even going to have the numbers until a month later. So we've dealt with this in the past, and we've been able to work together to cobble together a fairly efficient process. But this new legislation adds a whole new layer of complexity to the problem.
Yeah, so you can see where the timelines aren't working out here. In the bill, it states the most current value. We don't know what that means. What is the most current value at what point in time through the assessors and the appeal of values and the finalizing of values, and at what point do we consider those values in order to calculate a preliminary levy rate that will allow budget capacity increases, which is well beyond all of our taxing districts' budget hearing requirements that they are obligated to meet. So this is a very difficult time, for sure.
And then this, if I understand correctly, we are obligated by, I believe our budget's usually around August 17th. We have a deadline that we have to have firmed our budget in order to meet the deadlines to submit it. And
Yes.
It's usually in August, but it's right after this date. So and we're also not allowed, I mean, we can put our budget down
Right.
after the July date, but if we needed to adjust it and go up, we couldn't. So there are a lot of constraints according to the state statute, yet lack of
Yes.
clarity.
Yes. In addition to that, you have budgeting publication requirements as well that need to be published in the newspaper 2 weeks prior to your budget hearing. That is also a statutory requirement.
Which the
As well.
Our formal L2, the completion of our budget process, is generally due the first week in September to Canyon County, and that is the ultimate drop-dead deadline. But you have to back up the publication requirements and the hearing requirements prior to that in order to get to that date.
More specifically, I think it's the Thursday prior to the second Monday in September.
Thanks, Steve.
As far as that's what's written in code. So that's the assessor's timeline and rolling into this new bill, and how do we calculate what that preliminary levy rate is and the language that's used there. I think they use preliminary levy rate for new construction increase, but for this annexation and fire, they use new levy rate. We don't know what the difference between a preliminary levy rate and a new levy rate is at this time, right? We're still waiting for clarification on that.
Steve, I have I'm sorry.
Sure.
I have a question. Does the Canyon County Commissioners have an authority to cap appraisal values of homes? Have they ever seen that before?
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Does the Canyon County Commissioners have the authority to cap the appraisal values of homes? Like in this year, we should be doing that, but can they do that statutorily? Which would reduce the property taxes on the owner?
That would be an excellent question for the assessor, and I'll try to answer that. So
There's a way we can come back on the state from doing this by saying we're not going to. Go ahead.
Yeah, the assessor is bound by code when it comes to residential property, to be between, I believe it's 92 and 102% of market value when they assess it. If the assessments come in below that 92 or above, the state tax commission comes in and revalues all of our properties and then cuts every circuit breaker benefits that our citizens would receive or qualify for as well. So he's really bound by the market value and what the sales are reflecting.
See.
So I don't think the commissioners have the ability to cap the assessed value.
And did I just understand something, that if we did not abide by state statute and stay within the parameters of assessed value to market value, that the state could come in and remove the circuit breaker
That's
benefit?
correct. That's the way I understand it, Mayor.
That is really sad.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that he's bound, yeah, the assessor certainly is bound by those, and to listen to the statement Representative Moyle mentioned about Canyon County's assessor, Brian, and reflecting Walmart's valuation, stating that valuation should have been on an income approach. Again, guidelines to how the assessor, or not even guidelines, but the way the industry standards are for assessment purposes, Walmart would not reflect an income approach. It certainly is a cost approach for those big box stores. And which brings up a good point too. We in the state of Idaho, especially in Canyon County, we are seeing property tax relief And it's an important message that at least our Canyon County Controller and our clerk really are driving, that there is property tax relief. The property tax relief is coming at for the large commercial sectors of Canyon County, while property taxes increasing in the residential. And we hope for a fair and equitable system, but that separation has certainly separated over the last 5 years as we've seen the residential property values go through the roof. And I think Doug touched on the fire annexation. Was there any questions regarding the money spent? I don't think we have an answer to that, but it is certainly a concern that we're looking into and or waiting for direction from the State Tax Commission. So moving into how the Nampa fire annexation relates, and again, these are very preliminary numbers, very, very preliminary numbers, as assessment notice hasn't gone out. But if we were to look at the total amount that was for the city of Nampa that was levied last year between Nampa, or for just in the city of Nampa, would have been $37.68 million. If you combined, which Nampa Fire also levied over $2 million, so that was a total between the Nampa Fire and City of Nampa of around $40 million. If we take a look at the potential based on these the values and this preliminary levy rate, the capacity in which the city of Nampa would be able to levy this year would be $51 million, but then you would have to reduce that by the amount of whatever spent on fire means, right? So, and you
just real quick clarification. Steve's talking about the total levy rate. My numbers earlier were just the general government portion, so don't equate the increase from 36 to 51 as an increase. I just spoke just general gov. He's talking the total levy.
Yes. So the city, or with Nampa Fire annexing into the city, they're allowed to take this levy rate times the value of that annexation, which in some of our models, it looks like they will be able to increase their budget by roughly $13.5 million. So what does that mean? That means that inside the city of Nampa, with the reduction of because of the fire for the city on the city's budget, and then increase for the Nampa Fire budget, it's going from $40 million of property tax levied to roughly $58 million. And that's based on the numbers that Doug is anticipating the city of Nampa levying. So the amount of tax dollars that are going to be generated within the city is certainly going to go up, dependent on what Nampa Fire does.
I don't know that I understand that. So I'm sorry. I don't know if everybody else.
No, I think what Steve's saying is that they will have, whether they choose to exercise it or not, similar to us, they will have a taxing authority that will allow for a degree of increased spending beyond what we currently budget. And the rationale is that in order to fund a new fire station, I don't think they can avoid cost. But what the presentation from the fire district is that most of that cost was being borne by the district and not so much by the city. So that was the presentation they gave to us, that there would be an increased cost at the district level, but not necessarily to the city employees, or to the city population, but their capacity to drive a budget levy is greater than what we're reducing. So I need to be clear on that. They could add more to their taxes, and I think they probably will because that's their impetus for providing a new fire station and staffing it.
So that certainly was my point, that the residents of Napa, through no fault of the city, are going to see, because of the annexation of the fire department, and depending on what the fire department does levy for, there's a potential for a huge increase. Certainly for residential, as we continue to see the shift, even with the $125,000 homeowners exemption, there's still, this year will be a shift because values in the residential sector has grown more than that 25% in 1 year.
So Mayor, so can we give an example? Say something simple. No, there's no $200,000 homes, but much anymore, but $200,000 homes. So what type of percentage? Do you have any projections at all? But if the fire district takes
The max, I haven't
no idea
worked that out.
whatsoever what the percentage of.
I'd have to look at that, but I'd be more than happy to run those figures.
For my mind, if I can have
Absolutely.
an example or something of that sort, that at least.
Yes.
Councilman, if we look at raw dollars, it's also important, very important to remember that while my budget was $12.5 million, it was reduced by $3 million of fees, mostly coming from the district. So if we have a $10 million reduction in our budget, and they come in at 13 or 14 or 15 million dollars, it's not going up $5 million because they're taking our $10 million plus their existing $3 and adding a little bit on top of that. It's not a dramatic increase, but it is an increase there.
And my main point, Mayor, which everyone is aware of, I mean, the sale on this, I realized we had no control of what the legislature was going to do, was that, at least for the citizens of Napa, this was not going to be an increase for them. So from a perception standpoint, whether the legislature gets blamed, I kind of doubt it. As Councilwoman Mucci said, I think probably we're going to take the blame and say, hey, you guys lied to us. And so that's why I'm asking these questions.
I think that's.
And Councilwoman Mucci needs to.
So, Mayor, when we made the hard decision about the fire district, it was because we couldn't keep pace with the need to increase the services that they need to provide. With infrastructure, impact fees would pay for buildings, but not people, all of these things. So our goal too there was to have people living in the county also pay more share by going to the district than lobbying on residents. But this has flip-flopped a lot of this, and now we will be putting more burden on residents because our citizens have said unequivocally public safety is their number one priority. And when we're still at pre-recession levels, we're trying to get there with police. We're going to get blamed. There's no way, but we have a responsibility. And I don't know, I think we got to be really clear in the message that if we need people to be safe, there's a cost to that, and it just shifted the cost onto the city to lobby that on residents.
And I think that the intent, the understanding from us was that the people outside of city limits in the district would pay more. It was clearly understood that right. We just weren't anticipating the city residents to pay more. So, and I let Jean step in because you have to leave. You're going to stay connected via phone, but just listening, but he needs to step out. So, okay. And so this somewhat answers Victor's question that he had earlier. So, I heard a difference between 51 million and 57 million just a few minutes ago. Is that correct? Which was the full tax base, not city, but broader. Is that an increase of about 6 million? I'm not sure what that equates to.
Inside the city limits, as the Napa Fire District annexes in, right, they will be able to, based on projections and calculations and these early preliminary values, they would be able to levy an additional $13 million within the city. Okay, so there's $13 million that the city residents would be picking up as a tax burden.
When you say the word additional, Help me understand what additional means, because previously there was none. So is it meaning that 13 million coming from city, now that's moving, the city of Nampa moving to fire district is up to 13 million. And what we have been, our base was about between 9 and 10.
And that's
Yes.
the levy
So,
capacity. That they could go up
capacity,
to.
right, and that was,
That's not saying they're going to, but that's what they could go to.
Extra 3.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so now you reduce the city's budget, and there's $3 million, right? That is additional. But GPS then comes in, right? GPS GI, and that's $9 million there. So you're looking
From last year.
From last year, because that the governor isn't sending that out, and so that will be levied this year as well, on top of this shift that we're seeing as well. So
In that aspect, even if the fire department levied less, it's still a big rebound impact in totality.
in totality, yes.
It's an over $9 million rebound this year, only because people got a break last year because of the COVID dollars that got applied. So, which was great. But we knew at the time, if we did it, that this year would be really challenging because people won't understand why that $9 million is back in. And that wonderful break everybody got last year will go away. So this year, actually, it should equal out. Because we're putting 9 million back in, but we're taking 9 million out, but it's going to be sitting over on the fire side. So it'll be a little bit shocking, but it would have been shocking anyway. And then there's about a $3 million difference possibly. So we'd have to look and see what that equates to for every single household.
Yeah, and I'll be happy to run those numbers as soon as we get a little bit closer on that. 'Cause I'm interested there too.
Buy things for me, William. Okay.
I think, because some of the projections that I was coming up is possibly a 40% increase, and that's not just Nampa, but a 40% increase for residents in some of the cities across our county could see that.
Because of the assessed values going up so high.
Assessed values, yes, and also a lot of the taxing districts have really towed the line over the last 2 years and found themselves in positions that they have to increase their budgets in order to provide the services that are needed and required moving forward. So that's additional. And of course, the shift, again, going back to commercial, will still see a reduction in taxes as well. I'm talking residential sector only. Not that I'm picking on commercial at all. This is the way the numbers work out.
And I think we've talked about this a lot, but back in 2016, for those listening, the legislature put a cap on the homeowner's exemption. And what that did, when they capped it at 100,000, if they had left the indexing on, as it originally was, it would be at about 149,000. Which is what we tried to move it to. The reasons why, and this is mostly on the House side, not the Senate side, but the reason why that's been argued that they didn't want to is because it would create a tax shift. But back in 2016, when they capped the homeowner's exemption, it created the tax shift. And today, because of the assessed values going up at such an incredible rate, the burden has landed on the homeowners. So when the homeowners are crying foul on taxes, it truly is there. But if they had left the indexing in place, we wouldn't have the tax shift that we have today. Everybody would have gone up equally. Instead, it shifted, and now the residential's bearing the burden of it. So it's quite unfortunate. It is what it is. It would have been nice to have corrected it this year.
Absolutely. And going back to the blame, right? So I think we all face that at certain points. I know our treasurer, as people come in to pay their property tax bill, it's on Canyon County letterhead. So we front the blame of some of that as well, and the city does. But looking at a tax bill for this year, I think what you'll most likely see for residential is that the tax didn't increase very much for the city of Nampa. But there's an additional line item on there, and that's the Nampa Fire District, and that will be the increase to residential property owners.
You just have to really work on the messaging. But you know what the other side is? We've needed a fire we've needed fire protection in Southwest Nampa for 10 years, and we haven't been able to afford it. And with this legislation in place, we wouldn't be able to afford it as we move forward. And at some point, you've got to let the people decide, elect the district, fire district commissioners, and make some decisions and let the people decide what to do with fire, because we need protection, but we can't afford it. So
And our budgets are now limited.
strained.
And I saw the governor's announcement of the $1,000 that they're going to be giving to each of the state police are getting $1,000, but yet our local taxi or our local fire protection, we have to decrease our budgets, right? So I'm not sure where they're coming up with that.
That's a really good question, right? We have, and they're flush with cash, and people don't understand. We don't have the opportunity to just take a surplus in like the state does, yet the state points their fingers at us and say that we're increasing our budgets when we're capped on our budgets, and we have a responsibility to provide public safety and everything else at that core level, yet
Yes.
we're not allowed to do so.
And even capped at our budgets, our budget capacity, we still did not take as much as we could have taken. We've taken lower, City of Nampa and Canyon County. So that's something to be said there too.
It is. Steve, thank you
Mayor.
very much. I really appreciate your efforts. Does the council have questions for Steve before he sits down? No? Thank you so
All right,
much.
thank you.
I appreciate it. Is there any other discussion on this matter before we go to the next item on the agenda?
Mayor Quinn,
Yes.
just for clarification purposes, I thought I heard that there's a potential property tax increase of up to 40%. Is that correct?
That is county-wide, you said, and it had to do with other taxing districts increasing their budgets. It's across the board. Is that correct? Or is that just Nampa?
It's very relative to where you live.
It's relative to where we live.
Steve,
I defer.
is that impacted by the GPSGI? Is that is that also part of that increase?
And of course, this is also speculations based on early values and early budget capacities being maxed out. They could see, yes, at 40%. There's potential for it. More realistically, probably 25%, I would say.
So there's no statutory limitations on how much you can increase per year? It can go up to that amount?
The assessed values.
The statutory limitation is put on the taxing district's budget, but not on the amount each individual property tax owner pays.
So if someone's on a fixed income and they see that type of a property tax increase, is that when they need to come to you to ask for relief on having to come up with that additional tax that the state doesn't really need at this point? They've got the money, but they're now saying that property taxes have gone up because the value of homes have gone up, and you're going to have to pay more because your property is worth more today than it was yesterday. But they're not seeing any increase in their income. So they're sitting in a home that has more value, but they don't have the ability to maybe pay for additional taxation. What kind of a message are we sending to the community when we're talking about that? What are we doing to help them? I guess we can't do anything because the state has mandated this.
Right.
And Mayor and Councilman, that's why people are having to leave their homes.
Well, yeah, they sell their home and they can't find another home to move into.
Yeah, they're not able to pay their.
Well, we have a whole new level of homelessness that we have facing us, and it's because of this. We have people that are getting booted out of their rentals because people are selling them because they can make so much and they can't find a place to live, and I've heard of them. And that there are people that have never been homeless in their lives that no longer have a place to live. And we had I'm mad about it, actually. I'm really mad about it because the state had the ability a year ago to address this at the get-go, and it is a state constitutional amendment, and it's a big deal that it hasn't been looked at, and nothing's been done. And you know what? We cannot continue to put the burden on our citizens, and we have. And I want to say, I've got to say this because, our legal counsel that I greatly admire and value has been an incredible, and Todd, I said I wouldn't point you out, but I'm going to, in that he has stood by us, he has supported us, he has been a reasonable voice, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your support. Unfortunately, I love the power of one, but this is one time that just one voice. But I will say, Jeff Agenbrod and Senator Lodge, alongside Todd Lakey in the Senate, have been there supporting us as local municipalities and have voted as we've needed them to, with no pressure intended. And I know there's pressure, but and I'm going to be bold in this: the Senate has been the voice of reason, the House has not. And it's happened all year, and it's happened last year, where the Senate is cleaning up what the House is sending over. And the Senate leadership has proven to be the voice of reason for our state. And I just want to say thank you for that. And I'm going to get in trouble for it, but I'll be bold. I don't know.
Mayor, may I have Steve come up one more time? And this is just projections, because, what Councilman Haverfield said, I mean, we've got to get prepared for the next legislative session. And I don't know, you read things, you don't know what works, what doesn't work. To me, California, I don't say much good usually about California. That's on record, I know. But anyway, they did at one time had a cap on owners per year. Did they not? As far as how much was 2% or whatever that could increase as far as their actual property tax amounts? My question to you is there one across the country, a state or whatever, that has a cap? And what that means is that changes. If that house sells, I understand, then the new buyer, of course, would be their taxes would increase greatly. But we're fixed homeowners and so on that have lived in their home 20, 30 years, where there would be a cap for their property taxes, that it could not go up at 25% or whatever we're just going to have. Is there such an animal out there?
Not in Idaho.
I know that. In other states, so that we can be looking at and start lobbying for our legislature to do something if that is something that we feel like that can work and protect our citizens.
So if there was a cap put on homes like that, I believe there would be a shift in taxes to other sectors, right?
Yeah, there'd have to be there. I mean, you're getting less money. I understand that.
Yeah. So you'd be shifting back over to the commercial
and ag
and where the homeowner's exemption being indexed, as the mayor has stated, I think that really does keep the balance between what commercial, agricultural, and residential, and how they offset. So as the values go up, they stay.
So we're just transferring though that. So my question is there a projected amount? I know as far as Representative Scogg's bill was $150,000, which ended up being $125,000 with this new bill. Is there a projected amount to catch up from 2016 where actually that exemption should be up to? Should it be 50%? I think there was some out there saying it should be 55%. So have you guys projected, or I'm just thinking there again for next year and whatever, what we need to be lobbying for?
So that's what we looked at this year. If the homeowner's exemption was roughly $150,000, then it would have balanced it back to about 2017 separation between commercial and residential. So if you wanted to get back to 2016, which 2017 would have been the first tax year after that cap. And when that cap was established, I believe the homeowner's exemption was actually $98,000 at that time.
Anyway, I guess what I'm looking for, and hopefully the city and whatever, is what we should be striving for as a team together, counties, cities, in this area, to be lobbying for representatives and bills for next year, since this one's already passed. Okay.
And the State Tax Commission does annual ratio studies based on sales data. And if each year the sales data was looked at and a new homeowner's exemption was adopted based off of those sales data, you would achieve that.
After we get through budget, I'm going to be calling a meeting together of our county and we'll have the county there. We need to have all the cities in our county there, and even other taxing districts, to talk about how we address where we are, because it's a very challenging place. We all have a desire to meet the needs of our citizens, and we'll have citizens there. But we need to figure this out, and it isn't happening at the legislative level. And the sad thing is we're not being listened to. And I'm going to say on the House side, we're totally not listened to. And so I greatly understand when citizens feel like we're not listening, and we want to listen and to rule accordingly. And in that case, we haven't been listened to. We've just been told that all we say is no. So.
And also to clarify the 55% homeowners exemption going from 50 to 55%. If you left it at 50% and increased the homeowners exemption to the 150, you would be shifting taxes to the lowest value homes. So lowest value homes would see a tax increase based on that because it's below that.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
50%, right?
Yeah.
The downside.
Lots of things to look at.
So that's where the 55% would come in, up to a cap of 150,000. And then that would alleviate that burden on our, lowest value residents.
Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is really a discussion to consider temporary suspension continuance of annexations pending an understanding of this impact. I will say that I visited with a couple of other cities. Caldwell, I didn't see it yesterday, but I believe they have an annexation coming, an ordinance that may be coming forward at their Monday night council meeting, which is a moratorium on annexations. My understanding is Parma and Greenleaf are considering it, but I can't speak 100% on that. My understanding also is that Meridian probably is not. Meridian has, because of the growth that has preceded us and the tremendous development, their budget they've got a great looking budget. And they're able to provide increases that are, as I have shared with the mayor, they're killing us because we can't match them. And it's making it very difficult, even in employee retention within the city. And that it's challenging because we don't have the budget capacity that Meridian has, but they're our greatest competitor when it comes to workforce. So that is challenging for us right now. The question we've got at our Monday night council meeting, we've got a couple of annexations and rezones that are coming in. And so I think one of the things that we need to consider is how are we going to approach growth? And one thing that I will commit that we are currently doing, and I've texted Rodney, there you are, standing up in plain sight. And Patrick, you have worked on this. We have been working to have the model to where we can model what the potential impact is of every subdivision coming in. It is critical that we get that done. And so we've got to figure out how to get it done and get it done now really quickly. Because I think one thing that the council needs to know is what is the financial impact of new development coming in and annexation based on the value of that annexation coming in. And not meaning to pick on anything, but we've clearly talked about for example, well, let's just say the multifamily, the storage units, RV parks versus residential versus commercial. I think we need to make wise decisions because do they cover the cost of services? If they don't cover the cost of services, we need to know that and be able to decide what are we going to do with it. But it is very, very difficult because we need affordable housing, yet affordable housing doesn't necessarily pay the cost of services. So I think that we're going to have some big decisions in front of us of what that balance is. And it's not a new question, right? What is the right balance of growth? No growth is not good. And some people say stop growth. Well, if you stop growth, then your existing shortage is going to be compounded. And you also don't have any additional revenues coming into the city to actually offset the cost of service to the city because you have continual costs of just health insurance benefits, wages to stay competitive, just the cost of goods. I tell you, there are two costs that are changing in the city this year. One is $1 increase in fuel guess what that does to the city budget? It makes a big difference in the city budget. The other cost increase is your utility costs. I think Idaho Power, while LED lights are causing a savings in utility costs, if you have an increase in power, that's an increase. So it's just an interesting balance. And I don't know that everybody really understands the full impact of budget and what impacts our budget, but it doesn't stay static. So I'll stop talking at that and ask the council if they have any thoughts on what we should do there.
Mayor, I have a couple of questions, possibly for Doug. If he, they're yawning. It's been a lot of late nights recently. First thing that I heard mentioned this morning was direction by council. We haven't answered any questions for you from a direction standpoint from the fiscal side yet. As we try to grapple with some of this information that's being prepared and presented to us, even this second question lacks enough information for me to be able to give you direction, to give council direction and the community as well. Transparency is important. We spoke about the fire district, whether the wisdom was to allow the consolidation of our Nampa Fire with the district. At the end of the day, it sounds like it's not a wash. We thought we had eyes wide open when we were given information. Sounds like there can still be an increase to the taxpayers of the city by virtue of that switch. We don't control it anymore as of January 1st. So hindsight's 20/20. We can't go back. Whether we supported it or didn't support it doesn't matter today. The city council will still be asked the question, was it a wise choice? And I don't know that I've heard it yet. If it was a truly wise choice, it just depends on the narrative that you bring to that topic. So as we step across item 1 to item 2 and consider the temporary suspension or continuance of annexations, I haven't heard yet where the smart growth is. We've been given an example about Meridian. They're doing it right. What are they doing different? Are they allowing developments that have a specific value base for residential? And if so, what is that value base? And I guess that's what Rodney was going to give us, was information on that because of cost of service. The other thing then is when we look at temporary pause, or if you want to use the moratorium word for growth, is that just multifamily housing? We talked about storage units, that's a given, but multifamily, single family as well, if they're smaller land tracts, or also we talking about commercial and industrial. We can't be cutting that off, otherwise, as a Nampa Development Corporation commissioner, it gives me, it puts us in a position, Beth can maybe speak to this, what do we choose to support or not support? We can't just say we don't want any more growth. That's the wrong message to be sent to the development community. That's the wrong message. It's not why I'm on this council, to provide advice along those lines. But we need to have a little bit better information prepared for us before we make a decision, especially Monday night. If that information is not available, I'm not going to support it because we need to have clarity. Mm-hmm. And smart growth can be positive growth. It can be done in such a fashion that we're still providing work opportunities for our citizens instead of them traveling and paying more for gas or however they're going to get there. So I've made a long statement, not really asked a question yet, but my concern as a council member, one of 6, is have we really been transparent with the community with this fire district decision? If we have, we have. I mean, that's clear. We made the decision to move forward in that regard. We want to continue to provide guidance where we can, but we're limited because we're no longer after January 1st going to have that control. But we trusted and verified the decision made. So I'm fine with that. But moving forward, I guess I would ask our staff to help us understand cost of service and what we should be looking at if we're looking at potential annexation and zoning pause or moratorium, whatever. What does that really truly mean? Is it talking about all sectors or just multifamily? and then what the cost of service would be. We need to have that benchmark to be able to work off of.
So just a couple things. I'm not asking for a moratorium. I just want to report out what other communities are doing with this and what they're considering. I think that, I think the answer for us right now is the information that we have begun that we haven't been able to complete, we need to complete it. And we need to complete it very quickly. I know there's a software that's going to help us. I know that we've begun the process. I think we need to make wise decisions in our growth. We've got people that are upset saying we're not pausing growth. Well, you can't just stop growth, right? And there are so many subdivisions that are already in that have already been annexed, that are in the approval process. Well, they've been approved, and they're in the preliminary and final plat approval phase. So I think the key is that we have the information and we look at what the cost of service is, and that we have the information. And so I think that's probably what we need to do for everything, for each decision, annexation and rezone that's coming in. We need to be able to make wise decisions with the best information that we have. I want to clarify something. On Meridian, I didn't say they were doing it right, and it isn't a matter of somebody doing it right or doing it wrong. It is that Napa's doing it wrong and that Meridian's doing it right. Meridian and Napa are two totally different cities. Meridian had a population, I think 30 years ago, of 13,000 people. They had a very small footprint. They're right in the middle of the Treasure Valley. They've grown like crazy. All that new growth is new valuation of homes. They have a different population base. They have new infrastructure, new homes, and their valuation is much higher than the city of Nampa. The city of Nampa is a large, older city. We have been the second largest city in the state for generations, and we're a large footprint. We've got a lot of older homes that the valuations were low. So our tax base and the valuation for the city of Nampa in the last 10 years is totally different than the city of Meridian. Plus, we were hailing, I'm thrilled that Amazon came in and that we had the first fulfillment center in the state of Idaho. But that was one big lift. Meridian has had multiples of those. So their new construction over the last number of years has surpassed us so far. And that new construction came in as part of their tax base. We haven't had that same new construction growth in our tax base, and that gives us a totally different tax base. The other thing that's happened across the state, the city of Nampa we've been very conservative, and we've left $6 million on the table. Well, it's made it hard to fund what we've needed to fund, but it's $6 million that our citizens haven't been paid in taxes, which is awesome. And that's between $100 to $400 a household savings that they've had because we've been conservative. But the sad thing is it's putting us in a very difficult place today in how to retain employees, especially when we're competing against our neighbors.
Mayor, could I add a comment back to Councilman Haverfield's transparency question on the fire department? When this was presented to us, we had good information and we were transparent. But right piggybacking along with the mayor's comment about the cost of the valuation increase in homes, that's what's driving the levy potential increase for the fire department that we didn't know about a year ago. And so the rapid increase in the value of homes allows them, I'm not saying they will or they would, but it allows them a higher levy potential than we earlier assessed when we presented to you, because at the time we presented what we knew of the valuations. So how they act and how they budget, it's kind of beyond our control, but the intent was not to go forward and drive, significant cost increases to anybody in the city. The intent was to have it be more relatively neutral with increases in the district, and that was true then and true now. But if valuations are going up and the levy rate applies to that valuation, you have more tax potential, then it becomes, how self-controlled can the fire district be in developing their own levies? And we can't control that, no.
But you know what? I want to say something, though. I do not want it. First of all, the decision, we made the best decision we could with the information we had at that time. there are two factors that have changed. One is this legislation. The other one is the valuations that have gone up. I believe we made a good decision on the fire district, and I'm not going to second guess it. It will be years before we figure out whether that was the best decision, but I don't think we should ever be rethinking it. And the one thing that we have been committed to do is to be transparent, forthright in every decision we've made and be external facing on that with our citizens. And we've talked to our citizens about it. I think we made a good decision. We made the best decision we could at the time with the information we had. So I don't want to ever give an impression that we were not upfront and at the time, our understanding was there was no increase to the local citizens in taxes. We knew that the people outside the city of Nampa would then have to carry their fair share, and it would be equal. So there was going to be an increase to people outside the city of Nampa. We did not anticipate an increase. However, the increase inside could be very related to the other factors that are not controlled by the city. So.
Mayor,
I'm not sure if you're thinking that was my point. It's not.
Okay.
I just broached the subject for transparency purposes now, so that it's out on the table, so that we have a clear understanding of where we stand today. We made the decision as a council, move forward based upon the best information provided, and there was a trust and verify approach.
Right.
That's all we can do at this point.
Exactly.
I made the comment that hindsight's 20/20. I'm not going there. That's not where I'm going. So please understand that wasn't the reason I made the point.
Thank you.
I just wanted us to be clear as far as we move forward. So as we make decisions, we haven't given finance the direction that they need yet.
True.
Because we don't have the information yet available to us to make that decision.
Right.
So we're not going to have any direction given, maybe even as of Monday night, but hopefully as we get closer to budget times, we'll have better information available.
Well, we do know, Councilman, that once we approve a budget, it will be with your complete and full support, and we won't try and put anything through that you don't, as a council, agree with.
If we're limited to 8%, though, and the Amazon new construction value is that 8%, then we're not raising our general budget by anything.
Right.
Which is the message then given moving forward. So I guess that's, again, where we'll make that decision. It'll be clear. I think as we move forward, we'll have the limitations, and then the dealings with the police, union negotiations, that's going to happen. We're going to do the best we can. We're limited. They see that. That's the transparency issue. So I'm good with that. So really what it comes down to now is, as we look at this other item, I guess, Beth, are you going to be preparing anything for the Nampa Development Corporation? So we'll have the same type of a conversation? Okay. Because that's going to be important as we support either industrial growth, or are we going to pause that too? We can't go down that path. That's been a major effort by that urban renewal district to make this happen for the benefit of our community. So, and the taxable value is, maybe that's what you're talking about with Meridian. I'm not seeing any major developments, but yes, minor commercial, industrial type growth along the corridor. That's what they're seeing. We want to continue to foster that type of opportunity and give Beth a clear direction to do that. So, so as we move forward, I guess the clarity is the smart growth. What do we really want to try to support? And I mean, a house in the North End now is in that 200 plus range, 200,000 plus range. New construction is well over $200 a square foot. It's amazing what the values are for new construction, depending on where it's at, and if you can even pre-order something. And there's no more spec homes that are available, other than once it's done, and they put it on the market, and it's a bidding war. So it's a really weird time, and it won't always be like this, but it is the way it is right now. So I don't know, as far as having that discussion on Monday night, it's going to be an interesting discussion depending on what Rodney brings forward. But that's why we're
Randy,
council.
thank you for your comments and follow-up. So Rodney, would you like to, I see you waiting to say something, so.
Mayor and Council, we're happy to do the fiscal impact analysis, and we can run that for general information such as single-family homes, multifamily homes, commercial. We can't get to the specifics without further software and comparables to actual market rate. I guess my concern with annexations right now is I can give you that information on a case-by-case basis, but we are also struggling with how is this bill going to impact even that? Because we tie that to our levy rate. And so, I mean, there's complexities to this that I'm not sure this fiscal impact analysis is even going to be able to give you a good number to say, yeah, this is going to be beneficial to the city or not beneficial to the city. Part of the question I guess I have still is I can do it on a case-by-case basis, but that's just based on your levy rate for that specific project. And then if you add up all of those things, you're potentially running up against your cap, your 8% cap at that point for the new construction and the general fund cap. So there's some complexities here that I'm not sure we can work into a fiscal impact analysis on a case-by-case basis.
I think one thing we are doing is police are running the numbers. And so we have a Ready Team meeting every other week. It's looking at all new development coming in. Eric Skoglund is currently the representative from the police department that sits in that meeting. They're running the analysis of, with growth, how many new officers, based on what that growth is, would it require, so that at least we can look. And what we talked about the other day was we'll come back and do an analysis of the last year, what has. Well, and it's complex because we may approve an annexation and a rezone, but the actual homes coming online, we partner then with Patrick looking at the building permits to see how many are coming on and when they're coming on, right? So we're trying to project out how many officers we'll need based on information that we don't really know.
Yeah.
But I think that's going to be our commitment. We're going to do the best we can. I think we need to move forward with the software, and we'll do the best we can to give information. And we pretty well know, and that's why we did the moratorium on storage units. I support the growth in the north industrial area that we've done. I wouldn't anticipate any change. The thing that Beth is doing right now is when she sees someone looking at relocating here, and it's more of a warehousing that isn't going to have the strongest tax value and jobs, then she may let them look at Caldwell, right? I mean, so we can handle that in such a way that we make sure that our growth is smart growth and that it's the industry we need, that we're not growing for the sake of growing. So I think while this is difficult, I wanted to put this on for discussion. I don't know that I'm not going to recommend that we necessarily do a moratorium. I just think we need to make wise decisions. My commitment as mayor, because you serve as, city manager side, is that we as a team with staff, we're going to do everything we can to get the best information before you so we can make wise decisions, because we're going to have to be very intentional in what we bring in. And I think we could do that. And then we'll work with legal to make sure our intentionality is legal, right, in the zoning. And that's the other piece of it. We've got to figure out how to do that. So one thing I appreciate about our legal counsel is you have a very strong background in planning and zoning. You understand it and get it. And so I think together we need to come up with that plan of how do we do this and do it well. I don't have that answer today, but I think that we've got an amazing team and we'll be committed to do it. So does that sound like a plan for council?
Mayor?
The question, Randy, just a minute. Nick, comment, and you've had the floor for quite a while here. I just want to make it clear where I stand. And where I stand is PAUSE. We need a pause. I'm only speaking for myself. And that's on residential. Mm-hmm. And I know we've been talking for a year. That's not going to be perfect. The software hopefully will help. I don't know what the time range is on that. But until I personally can get a better idea of what the cost of service, what the fiscal impact on the city, and so on, I will not be, I mean, I shouldn't say just on everything. Well, I'd like to look at a per basis. I realize there's a lot of things in the flow right now that we can't do anything about, but any new applications, I personally will be positive.
Oh, that's good to know.
It's good to know.
Mayor, the only other question that I had for you is from a budgeting standpoint moving forward, like Patrick's department, other departments that are dependent on new construction, you have a baseline today, that increase, that 8% increase, you're going to have to start looking at long-term how that's going to be factored with the potential hires as well and staffing of, those current positions, because that's going to affect, I mean, the ripple effect is all the way down the board, not just fire and police, it's everyone in the city. So sorry, I need my mic on. A little clarification. So you are entirely correct, Councilor, on the addressing the growth and the challenges with development services. However, just a minor point of clarification, the 8% technically doesn't apply to them, it applies to general government, but they would be limited by if you as a council decide to limit the growth in the city, that would limit the earnings capacity of the development services to pay for their own costs. So you're correct. That's the avenue we would go down.
I wanted to make to Darrell before he makes a blanket statement that what you're saying is affecting a lot more than just a pause. It's affecting people's jobs and their decisions to stay here or move out.
I'm hoping it's not a long pause. I'm just saying we're in a flux right now.
Mayor, can I weigh in? Mayor and Councilman Berner, I just wanted to bring to your attention, we have been studying our growth, which has really been very quick, very fast in the last, actually since last August is when we started this. We are looking at projecting out 20% more revenue and permits in FY21 than we had in FY22, and likely having probably not that big bump in 22. It's probably going to be about the same as ending here, which is about, like I said, the revenue and the permit volume. That said, we are understaffed to maintain a decent level of service. So some of what we're bringing to the council, we're just going to have to work with finance and figure out the best blend. A hard stop may hurt us in the short term just because we're obligated to do the plan review, issue permits, and do the inspections on everything that's in the pipeline now. So we just need to, a more gradual pause. And I'm working with Rodney and actually our consultant today to sort out the fiscal impact analysis so that we can have project types in there rather than every single project having to crunch the numbers. We're going to have a matrix of if it's a 12,000 square foot warehouse building versus a 150,000 square foot factory building, we'll be able to have a range on that matrix on whether or not it's contributing and paying its way or it's not. And so I think that's getting more granular in that is going to take a lot more staff time, a lot more money, but I think it's going to give you a good compass on which projects are beneficial long-term to the city as far as growing the tax base wisely and which projects aren't. So I just wanted to weigh in on that.
Mayor, I mean, it would just clarify, I realize it's still exploring permits and finances. Talking about the budget. Say pause. I'm not looking at light industry, et cetera, or the
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments today? You know what? I want to say thank you to council for the willingness to be here this morning and to have this discussion. We need to have the opportunity to discuss. One thing I like about municipal government, and we do it openly, right? We don't have these discussions behind closed doors. We do it openly. And so it's been a good discussion. And Randy, thank you for your perspectives and for sharing. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mayor, just another day, but because it could affect finances and so on, that as far as this federal money that may be coming in from an infrastructure standpoint, just if we can have that discussion and see where the council lies and how that money possibly, if we do accept it, how it would be utilized. So.
I failed to get that on the agenda for Monday night, and I think we're going to put it on the agenda for the 7th of June because until like yesterday, we've gotten a little bit of a understanding. We have not received the money. We have to apply for it. So if it's okay, we'll look at June 7th council meeting to discuss how much we're going to get and what the criteria is around it and what we could potentially do or not do.
I think that affects everything else. So if that money's accepted, number one, number two, if it is accepted, what it can be used for.
Right.
Mayor, if I could, just for brief clarification, our approach right now is to understand, but not to build that money into the budget at this time.
And that's true. And my understanding, if that is accepted, it can be utilized through 2024.
Correct.
Correct. All right, any other comments? Thank you, and I would stand for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, council.